All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Steve Reichenberg. I'm at the Kellogg School and also affiliated with the Kellogg Institute. And it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce Claudio Orrego. So, and Claudio is here this semester as a visiting fellow of the Kellogg Institute, but he's also affiliated with and supported by the Kellogg School of Global Affairs and the Institute for Educational Initiatives, or ACE. And occasionally when you're asked to do these introductions, you're kind of scanning the bio, looking for something interesting to say about the person. This is not one of those occasions. Actually, I've known Claudio since he was 14 years old. I was living, it's rare that you're going to do like a presentation, you can say that. But I was actually, had just graduated from Notre Dame. I was working at a small, privately run orphanage in the southern part of the city in a very poor neighborhood. Claudio was a then sophomore in high school at St. George's, which is a Holy Cross run school that Father Paulson had been deeply involved in, and he has over many, many decades in Chile. Great to have him here, along with a number of other kind of specialists and people with deep connections to Chile. And working at this orphanage, Claudio came with a whole group of other students from St. George's to serve as a volunteer, became involved in the projects there as a whole. Actually, this remarkable cohort of friends of his that went on to become a minister, well-known film director, actor, educator, activist. Claudio, kind of from a very early age, had a very strong sense of public service. He actually became the president of his class at St. George's, went on to university studying law at the Catholic University under the military government of Augusto Pinochet, and that at the time he became then the president of the kind of student union of the Catholic University, which is a very prominent national role in the late 80s in Chile. Claudio, at the time, I think, was living actually in the picture you see here is of the town of Kellogg, which is kind of in the foothills of the Andes. It's fascinating, kind of mixed, very poor communities, but as we move up the sides of the mountains, from actually some more affluent parts, some very interesting space that he first got to know. After going to graduate school at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, came back and became the two-time mayor of Kellogg, and which was really distinguished because every time I was then back living in Santiago, working there, and every time you turn around and there'd be a new kind of dynamic project with Google or with Microsoft or something else that's having some kind of social impact, it was always in Kellogg. At the time, I was actually working with Harvard University. They were looking at a big new project that was to work with the government on trying to do a major evaluation of an innovative early education initiative. The first place that the pilot project was in Kellogg with Mayor Claudio Orrego. Claudio went on to become two-time minister of Housing and Urban Affairs, as well as Minister of Interior. And then he went on to become, most recently, actually, Intendente, which is kind of the governor of Santiago, and which is a city of almost 8 million people, and dealing with some of the most complex issues of which he's going to talk today, governing the urban revolution. But as you think about the challenges cities face of public safety, resilience, climate change, social inclusiveness, sustainability, economic development, all things that he's kind of really dealt with in just really innovative and creative ways. He's had the chance multiple times to do comparative work, looking at what else is happening, not only in Latin America, but in other parts of the world. He's done a lot of work with the Inter-American Development Bank. And some of the most interesting things, actually, that he's done more recently with his role as the Intendente was this comprehensive model for intervention in high crime and violent neighborhoods, kind of through plans that looked at urban redesign, social and community intervention, and police intelligence. So there's all these different kind of interesting experiences that he's had, this kind of interesting reflective piece that he's very, very engaged in, and which is what he's doing here, which is a chance to reflect on what does it mean to this notion of urban revolution and lessons from it. The last thing I want to say is he was actually a presidential candidate in 2013, was not successful. The hope is that there will be another future successful run at that at some point in the future. So someone I'm delighted to introduce, someone with a true kind of vocation for public service, and also a really deep interest in understanding the underlying dynamics of policy making, policy change, community engagement. And so it's just a great delight to have you here today, Claudio.
Thank you, Steve. I was kind of overwhelmed with the situation. Well, thank you all for being here. Of course, the Kellogg and all of the Kellogg school that were allowed me to be here. As you were explaining, I'm going to try to walk you through and give you like a small overview of why is it that we speak about an urban revolution and what do metropolitan areas or mega cities have to do with that revolution. How does Santiago look? Many of you have been in Santiago, others haven't. So what are the two tails, the lights and the shadows of this big city? How is like governing a 7.3 million people city? How does it look like? What things were we able to accomplish and what things were pending? And at last, what lessons can we take from that specific experience in one city, one capital city of Latin America for this more general discussion? First thing is, I will give you a lot of data. I will mention all of it. It's just going to be there so you can watch it. But there's one specific year, 2007, which is very important for the urban revolution. For the first time in world history, we overcome the threshold of 50%. So 50% of the people in the world by that year were living in cities. If you take into account that at the beginning of the 20th century, only 14% of people lived in cities. And that by 2050, 70% of the people of the world will live in cities. You get an image of how fast we're going into this urbanization process. Of course, regions are different. North America and Latin America are the most urbanized regions in the world, where Africa and Asia are not. So that's why 90% of the net growth of urbanization will be in emerging economies throughout the world. There's supposed to be 4,000 cities of more than 100,000 inhabitants. There's a huge variety of the size of the city. I'm going to focus this time on megacities and metropolitan areas. And of course, there's been a lot of debate in the literature, both in the US and elsewhere, in Europe, in Latin America, about should we talk about global cities? That is a new way of understanding the global economy. Should we be optimistic about the evolution of cities? As some people have mentioned, the triumph of cities, or should we be worried about the crisis, the new urban crisis around the world because of this rapid urbanization? Also, this has been in the international agenda, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the Climate Change Agreement in Paris, to the Disaster Risk Reduction Agreement in 2015, and of course, the 2016 Habitat Third Conference in Quito, and then the follow-up for Latin America, the new urban agenda for CEPAL, have been kind of, either you see it from the risk and resilience perspective, or you see it from a climate change perspective, or just because of the issues of urban development. It has been very top in the agenda of the international organization, both political, UN, OES, but also more technical, or financial, IDB, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, and the World Bank. It has also had some different flavors, as I say. Some people would like to focus on the health of cities. We have a lot of problems with health people, both mental and physical health. So it really does matter the type of city we build in order for people to be more healthy. There's an alliance of 200 cities around the world about the issue of health, and of course, the World Health Organization is behind that flavor. There's the flavor of smart cities. How can technologies help us to improve the efficiency and the cleanness of our cities? What do we mean exactly by sustainable city? It's only about the use of new technologies, but it's also about urban planning. So the sprawl and not sprawl of a city, what is the influence with that? So we have the sustainable cities approach. And then, last but not least, more recently, the issue of resilient cities. Both the World Bank, the IDB, the Rockefeller Foundation have pushed forward this agenda of saying, how can those cities prepare themselves for climate change disasters? How do they're able to coordinate different efforts in order to be able to address these issues? Why? Because urbanization has a lot of qualities, a lot of opportunity, but has a lot of problems as well. Many of the cities in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, issues of water pollution, waste management. If you go to Haiti, for example, you will see waste everywhere. So you have the depletion of biodiversity and high quality agricultural land because uncontrolled urban growth, traffic congestion. If you go to Asia, some of the cities, Bangladesh, or even some Latin American cities, like Sao Paulo, it's very difficult just to drive around. And of course, the issue of urban mobility. How many hours of your day are you spending on just commuting from one place to the other? Access to social services such as affordable housing, health, education, social segregation. So even cities that are not doing that bad, they have actually 2 or 3 or 4 cities within one because of the segregation inequality of them. Crime and violence, economic growth and productivity, how do cities attract talent and also investment. And especially, the uncontrolled suburban growth and sprawl and low density urbanization, and also air pollution and CO2 emissions that are part of this, environmental concern about the type of cities that we're building. 70% of the people in the world will live in cities. It really does matter how you plan, organize, and develop those cities in order to have a more cleaner and safe planet. Let me just give you one example. I just put that aspect to the last group, just to show you how things can really work worldwide in terms of planning and environment. These two cities, I like this image. It was just published by the World Bank. The one in the left of you is Atlanta. The one on the right is Barcelona. Both of them, same population, 5.3 million. Square kilometers, one is, in terms of transport, one is 4,600, the other one is 162. And of course, the most important thing, the emissions or carbon footprint. One is 7.5 tons of carbon emissions per inhabitant. The other one is 0.7. So doesn't matter how you plan the city, how you build the city, it does matter in terms of transport. And this is the things we're dealing and we're seeing around the world. Well, let's talk about these megacities. Around the issue of the urban revolution, we have these megacities. 33 cities right now, over 10 million people in the world. By the end of 2030, there'll be 43. We're talking about the size of Tokyo, 37 million, Delhi, 29 million, in Latin America, Sao Paulo, Mexico, 22 million. 300 of the larger metropolitan areas account for 20% of the world's population and almost 50% of the GDP. So concentration, both in specific spaces and also of economic strength, are part of this revolution. One of the complexities in this revolution, that's why I focus on the issue of governing, not only because I was a mayor and a governor and a minister of housing, but because it's really a challenge that more often than ever before, you will find overlapping jurisdictions. So you will have different municipalities under the same influential area, as we call it, metropolitan area. What do we understand by metropolitan area? First, these highly densified urban centers and their surrounding areas, which labor markets are highly integrated. Also, their transport systems, with usually more than one local administration within them, and in terms of analysis, more than 500,000 inhabitants. So you have more than one municipality that is kind of the same area. You will see it in London, 33 different boroughs, in Barcelona, 37 different ayuntamientos, Santiago, 34 different municipalities, same city, same metropolitan area. It's supposed to be, the forecast by the UN is that by 2030, 60% of the world's population will live in cities like this one, metropolitan areas. More than one municipal government and market and transport systems integrated. 90% of the metropolitan areas around the world have more than 2 municipalities. Some of them up to 100. The case of Istanbul, I think there are 65 in Istanbul, 65 different municipalities within one city. And of course, this high fragmentation, both territorial and sectorial, has a lot of costs and demands a new government structure. However, as you can imagine, it's not easy to build this new type of structure. You have different municipalities competing one with each other. You have the national government that is very concerned about what's going on through the ministries and sectoral approaches. What happens, this is in general in the world, what happens in Latin America? Well, we have a lot of concentration in cities. Only 180 cities add up to 50% of the population of the region. And a recent study by the CIPEC analyzed 64 metropolitan areas that account for 20% of the Latin American population. And it's interesting because these are 64, but they add 1,000 municipalities within them. And the average weight of the national population is 11%. That means that each one of these metropolitan areas accounts at least for 11% of the national population. However, we have some exceptions. Montevideo, San Jose de Costa Rica, they account for more than 50% of the national population. Santiago, Chile, 42% of the national population. So you can imagine the complexities of this. I mean, then you have the breakdown. Some of them are more than 10 million, some of them between 5 and 10, others between 2 and 5, and the majority, I would say 34, is between 1 and 2 million. These are big cities. On average, they have 15 municipalities within them, this metropolitan area. And not all of them have their plans, frameworks. Only half of them have certain or some governing body for the whole metropolitan area. Only 50%. And of that 50%, 35% have an elected authority, and the rest have some sort of an association. It can be like a collaboration agreement with the municipalities. It can be just a transport authority. It will vary from city or metropolitan area in different parts of the world. What are the main functions they're dealing with? Urban planning, mobility, water and sewage services, waste management, watershed management, and economic development and energy. These are, on average, the issues that are being dealt at the metropolitan area. Not education, not housing. These are either national or local, but these are kind of the issues that are being dealt. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of political complexity around this issue. First, the size. It's not the same a city of 120,000 like South Bend than a city of 22 million, which is larger. So you have an idea. 70% of the countries in the world have less than 7 million people. 70% of the countries in the world have less than 7 million people. And we're talking about cities of 22 million, or 10 million, or 8 million. So these are countries, really. And of course, what percentage of the national population is in one of these cities is relevant in terms of the reforms. I mean, you can imagine Santiago with 40% of the population, where it's the same place where the national government is. So the governor of Santiago, the new elected government next year, is going to have a lot of political power. Imagine in Montevideo, imagine in San Jose, the recent, the recent president of Argentina was the former mayor of Buenos Aires, the recent president of Salvador was the mayor of Salvador. So it really has a lot of political implications. But also the number of municipalities, not the same to deal with 2 municipalities than with 34 or than with 100. And also, sometimes you have, for example, in the case of Medellin, there's the Medellin or the Aburrá Metropolitan Authority. It has 10 municipalities, but Medellin is the most populated municipality, has 67% of the population. So when there's one municipality very strong, it's different when then there's no municipality with more than 7% of the population of the metropolitan area, like the case in Santiago. So as you can imagine, this, by the speed, by the scope, by the scale, by the complexity, both political and it's really a revolution that we're living. And how do we govern these realities from country to country, to city, is very different. Let me say a word about Santiago. So Santiago is the capital of Chile. Some of you have been there. 7.3 million people. We have a large percentage of the GDP is generated in Santiago. Financial services, commerce, as you can imagine, we have a larger GDP per capita than the rest of the country. Even though the mining companies are in the north, we still are concentrating a lot of economic power in the city. And in terms of government, we have this governor or intendente appointed by the president of the country. This has been there for 200 years, so it's not just a recent event, but that implies how difficult it has been in Chile to decentralize. We have been the most centralized country in the region by far. Good disciples of the Bourbons from Spain. We have 52 mayors in the metropolitan area, 34 of which are in the urban part. So we'll say the city of Santiago has 34 different mayors. And on top of that, it has 34 elected regional councillors. So you can imagine, and on top of that, you have all the ministries and the national government in the same place. So actually, my office was across from the National Palace. So you can imagine the duality and the tension with that. So how is Santiago doing? Many of you know, of course, the shiny face of Santiago. The face of the rankings. Best city to do business, best city to live, best city to travel. A love city, tech city, which is true. I love my city, and I think it's a wonderful city to live. And we have been transforming our attitude as Santiaguinos to love a little bit more our city. We are very good at blaming our city. Now we are learning to love it and to discover all the good things about it. And of course, there are highlights. Just to mention one, which I think is very impressive, is when you see the infrastructure of the city. We have the second largest metro in the region, probably the best run metro in the region. 141 kilometers and 37 more kilometers being designed. We have a network of privatized urban highways that were financed by the private sector. $1.8 billion invested in 215 kilometers of highways. Some of them free flow with high, top of the line technology. We have invested a lot in our bus system. More than 200 kilometers of dedicated lines of BRTs, bus rapid transit systems in Santiago. And in terms of just basic service, 100% of coverage of water, clean water, of course, 95% of coverage of sewage system, and something very impressive, 100% of waste water treated in the city. So, you would say this is the shiny face of Santiago. However, it's not the only face of Santiago. Santiago is a very unequal city. And these are two slides of the same city, taking the same city. So you have, poor areas of the city that are as the poorest in the region, and then you have the, tallest building of South America. So even in an earthquake country like ours. And this translates to, a lot of inequality and segregation. The blue part, as you know, Santiago, Providencia, La Dehesas, Las Condes, the rich part of Santiago. Rich people live with rich people. But then the rest, you don't have services, you don't have transport, you don't have, basic public spaces. So it's really at least two cities in one. A famous poet in Chile, Nicanor Parra, said a poem that I think applies here. He said, "There are two breads. You eat two, I eat none. Average consumption, one bread per person." That is what we call the tyranny of averages. So on average, Santiago is doing well. When you double click the average though, disparity and inequality is very high. On top of this inequality, you see it in transport system, access to public spaces and given areas, banks, pharmacies. Whatever indicator you want to see it, you have very different cities in one. On top of that, you have the fragmentation. In the left, you see the administrative fragmentation, different comunas. You have an elected mayor with an elected city councillor with their specific attributions. So how do you think a city as a whole, when citizens would not know the limit and the boundary of their own city? They will close from one borough to the next one without knowing which one is the boundary. And of course, there are issues like transport, like urban planning, like environment that do not recognize these limits. And there's also the sectorial fragmentation. You know, the Ministry of Housing will do something without any coordination with the Ministry of Housing. For example, this is what we call some of the costs of this fragmentation. On the left, you have one neighborhood in one borough of Santiago, composed of 125,000 inhabitants for public housing, completely made by the Ministry of Housing. No transport, no public spaces, no health. It was just housing. No coordination whatsoever. We weren't building a city, we just were building public housing. On the right hand, you have a famous picture that I tweeted, and I had like 5,000 retweets when I was governor, and I called this the vertical ghettos. This is an area of Santiago, Estación Central, really near downtown Santiago, with no urban plan. You say, why no urban plan at all? No zoning laws. So you could build in that area of Santiago anything you wanted. So they built anything they wanted, you know, 42-story buildings with 1,000 apartments, with almost no parking lots, with sidewalks of 1 meter wide, 3 elevators. People wait 1 hour to get to the elevator. I mean, nightmare. And people will, defend this on behalf of the market. So this is what happens. This is the cost of fragmentation. But there's no one single orchestra director for the whole city, no single plan. Of course, we're a very vulnerable city. I mean, the last earthquake in Santiago was 8.8, so it's not, we're not joking here. Then we have the flooding and the landslide. I mean, we are right below the Cordillera de los Andes. So when it rains, and it's raining higher and higher every day, it used to rain until 1,000 meters. Last year, it rained until 4,000 meters. So you can imagine where it used to snow, everything is just, water and blood and mud. And this was only 2 years ago. This, the most important highway, Costanera Norte in Santiago, this had looked because of this climate change. And of course, the other extreme, fires and droughts. We also have, some environmental problems. Illegal waste dumps. Why? Even though we have a very strict environmental law and we have legal garbage dumps, it's because there is no one responsible for the illegal waste. So no municipality, no the intendente, not the ministries. So we have 72 illegal dumps. Where? In the rivers or in the boundaries between one comuna or the other, where nobody is really responsible. And of course, air pollution. Air pollution doesn't recognize municipal limits, and it has a very, in the case of Santiago also, a very unjust distribution because of the geography of the city. Most of the pollution is generated in the upper side of the city where the rich people live, and it stays at the end of the day in the poorest part of the city. So even air pollution is not equitably distributed in the city. And last but not least, even though we have been talking with Veronica, she's not here right now from Venezuela, but that Santiago is well known in the literature because of the gap between objective measures of crime and the subjective sense of insecurity. So we have the highest gap. And why? Because we used to be a very calm country, and more you see these type of guns in the day-to-day crimes throughout the city. So this is kind of the other side of this. There are neighborhoods in Santiago where you hear shooting every night. So it's not that it's one or the other; it's the same city with all the complexities of institutional divisions and also of the complexity itself of the problems. So what did we do in Santiago? I will not mention everything we did. It's just the most important thing. I think we gather, we convoke, private sector, universities, NGOs, civic unions, municipalities, government, national government, to build and to design an overall plan for the city. We call it a resilience strategy for the city, for a human and resilient Santiago for the next 20 years. We identify these 6 pillars, which are the ones you see over there. These are the 6 pillars, 75 objectives, and very concrete projects. One of the problems with the plans, citywide or metropolitan plans, is that you have a plan that is really is not applicable. It's just, good ideas, good intentions, wonderful inspirations, but there are no specific projects. These are a lot of computer projects. And for each one of the areas, we try to have policies, programs, and projects. Some of them very big, and some of them very small. So, for example, even though we're building the metro, these are kind of national-driven policies, we started by, replacing sidewalks. 200 kilometers of sidewalks replaced by the regional government, which I presided. We built 270 kilometers of bike lanes throughout the city to have an integrated system for bike lanes. And I think so. We didn't do everything, but we were doing specific projects hand in hand of having a more comprehensive strategy. In terms of equality, we have an early alert system for dropouts in the city. One of the problems is that each municipality, as I used to be a mayor, only knows the students that are studying in their municipality. But their students can be in another municipality or they can be at their home. So we have a metropolitan-wide system to identify if we have a dropout from school in every comuna of the city. In terms of resilience, because we have two water cuts in the last 4 years due to this climate change, we forced through the national government, the private company, to invest $80 million to have these big dams of water so they will not depend on the river when it rains up there. So there were, some of them were very big projects, 5, 10-year lifespan. That was very specific. Already Steve mentioned this critical neighborhood program. One of the problems with these more critical neighborhoods with crime, high rates of crime, is that they were very like police-driven programs. There was a lot of urban dimension to that, a lot of school dropouts, domestic violence. It wasn't only about how much police can we get into the neighborhood. It was a more comprehensive plan, and we were doing that. And of course, in terms of environment, we went from very specific projects as parks and pocket squares to a more general strategy for the whole city to, for example, air pollution. But I could speak, and I can, if you want, I don't want to take so much time. We can go over some of these things we did, but I think it's more interesting for you guys to know how we did it, and also what are the lessons that we draw from that, because it was complex. I didn't have that much authority. I didn't have that much money. So how an intendente, that, let me just do a parenthesis, I was in Notre Dame in 2013, after the primary that I lost to Michelle Bachelet, who became the president of Chile, when I received a call from her to become the intendente of Santiago. And all my friends said, please don't take it. Because for the last 100 years, intendentes of Santiago have lasted on average 1.2 years. So only 1 year and 2 months, that's the average in 100 years. So you will not last. These are very exposed position, very complex. You don't have, people will ask you if you were president of Santiago, you don't have neither the power nor the money, so don't take it. Well, I'm stubborn and I like the job, so I took it, and happily enough, I was able to run it for the 4 years, first time in one century, so it was not bad. So what we will try to do, and you will see lots of this stuff, it doesn't have to do with management and politics, rather than just legal tools. One is we try to change this idea of being the representative of the president in the region to a more being the advocate of the region in the government. So the minister will say, but you're complaining as if you were a mayor. And of course, I try to go from the image of the regional or metropolitan cop, domestic violence, violence in the stadiums, the manifestations of the students, to a more big mayor, being concerned about environment, urban planning, transport. Even though I didn't have the authority, I was the spokesman of those problems. Third, because I was a mayor for 8 years, for me it was obvious to go to the street instead of just being a more minister type of intendente. I was more like a mayor type of minister. So we would go to the street. I knew that even though I didn't have the money or the legal powers, my voice, my megaphone, how do you say that? Microphone or loudspeaker or whatever, was very high. So if I were to speak to some issue, if I were to ask people to come to the intendencia, they will come. So we coordinated, we implemented certain things that were strategic, and we communicate a lot. We run what they call the network government. We have these advisory councils, all the private sector, the big associations, all the universities. We're there on a weekly basis for 4 years, helping us to address issues of environment, of earthquakes, or whatever. We have civic tables, so we will ask those citizen groups that were in favor of animals, and those who were in favor of bicycles, or those who were in favor of against domestic violence. So we will have civic tables with them on a daily basis. The same with municipal networks. I didn't have any power over the municipalities, but they understood that in terms of crime or transport, if we weren't united as a city, we will never get something done from the government. And I think it worked out. And we had all of the ministers of the national government being at the regional and at my office discussing Santiago's policies, which it wasn't the case before. We try to create this what we call this new contract with citizens. Citizens, we're kind of approached as, you are clients with rights. So we're going to improve the quality of service, and that will be it. And then we realized that, time has changed. People want to have a say in whatever project they're having, be it a urban highway, or be it a park, or be it a hospital, or be it a urban development, or the zoning law. So we try to engage them on a more daily basis, to have shared responsibility, to treat them as citizens, and also to give them some ownership. Be it for, through civic campaigns. So we had a lot of civic campaigns in terms of, we call one of them, we call Clean Santiago. Do you see me? For people that wear bicycles or car drivers. Beware of the dog. We have 1.5 million dogs in Santiago. Almost half of them are in the streets, even though some of them have owner. So we have a campaign of consciousness. So we engage citizens, and of course, it's not easy to do it at a metropolitan level. I used to do it as a mayor in a 200,000 comuna, but you want to design the Alameda, the main avenue of Santiago. How do you go about participating? Who's going to be the invited, the guest? The one who drives through Alameda, the one who lives there, the one who works there, anyone. So it's not easy, but it's possible. And last but not least, I think we had a motto or an approach that I borrow from the IT industry, which is think big, start small, scale fast. So first, you have to have a plan. So for example, we developed this Santiago Breathe, Santiago Respira, which was a 20-year plan to get rid of air pollution in Santiago. And has a lot of implications for transportation, air pollution, industry, agriculture. But on the same hand, we started small. This is our program of focus squares with all the abandoned places in Santiago, with or without an owner. We approach them, we bargain with them, and we make these transitory squares that will be there until the owner decides to make the development. This one here was there for 50 years without any development there, so we did that. And of course, we have our regional-wide approach to parks. We constructed 200 hectares of parks in Santiago the last 4 years, all of them in the most poor places of the city. So we play at the policy side, big picture. We have this, what we call the golden nuts, of small projects, and then we have more large-scale projects in each one of the areas that we did. What were we able to accomplish besides the physical things that we built? Or first, I think we install a narrative, an image of a united city. You were to speak to Santiaguinos, and they will say, we are from Providencia, from San Miguel, from Peñalolén, from different places of the city. There was not like an image of the whole city. We even have a logo of Santiago Metropolitan. We were able to develop in a very participatory way this long-term vision and plan, which is only half of the equation. You need to implement the plan, but at least you have it. And the new administration, which has a different political sign, has that plan and is implementing as well. Third, I think we were able to raise the awareness of these metropolitan issues. Environment is not a municipal issue. Transport cannot be a national issue. You cannot have the National Ministry of Transport running the metro or running the buses. We have had a lot of problems in the last years in Santiago because of this issue. And of course, we need metropolitan-wide initiatives. You need a network of bicycle lanes. They don't work if they only end in the boundary of one of the boroughs. And last but not least, I think we were very important in the ultimate approbation of the law, the new constitutional reform, that will allow for elected governors next year in Santiago and in Chile. It's going to be a national law, a constitutional reform that will allow elected governors for all of the regions, but in the case of Santiago, it's going to be one authority directly elected by the people. So 40% of the population of the country will elect a governor for the next 4 years. Of course, someone will complain, and I'm part of that, discussion, that it doesn't have all the money, authority that it requires. Of course, it's going to be a gradual process, but I think people recognize by highlighting the cost of fragmentation and the problem of having the national government involved in every single detail of the city, that we needed a more closer level of government, at least for this metropolitan area, which is one of the problems throughout Latin America and also throughout the world. What type of government do we provide to these big urban settings that are being created now? So getting to the close, so what things I think I've learned from my experience as governor and having, as Steve was saying, being consultant for the IDB in Colombia, Argentina, in Ecuador. First, the main obstacles for doing these new institutional arrangements are not technical nor financial, are political. Be it national governments do not want to devote their power to these new institutional settings. Sometimes it can be municipal. In the case of Argentina, for example, municipalities have a lot of power and autonomy. So for them, it's very difficult to give part of their own turf to the new institutional body above them. So it's not only national government. And of course, when you have large metropolitan areas, not only Montevideo, but be it Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires, Santiago, it's harder politically to have an elected official for that big portion of the country. Second, in order to make this happen, I think it's important to measure and to show the cost of fragmentation and the lack of what happens when you do not have this metropolitan government. What you have seen in these very spread out cities, what you see also for example, in the case of Medellin, they started with the metro, and one municipality didn't want the metro, so the metro actually, turns away of that municipality. It's weird. I mean, transport systems are for cities as a whole. You cannot have one transport system per municipality. So you need to show them. A recent study by the OECD done in all the metropolitan areas of the OECD shows that metropolitan areas that have certain amount of governing bodies are more productive, grow more, and are more equitable than those that have not. Third, I think strategies to run and to govern these big cities require both comprehensive plans and emblematic projects. In some cases, Bruce Katz, in a very famous book in the US about the Metropolitan Revolution, shows, for example, that in Denver, the 20-something municipalities around the greater Denver area only got together through specific projects. The new airport, the new museum, the new zoo, the new sport arena, the new transit system. So sometimes it's not the institution itself, it can be also a specific project that makes sense to everyone. Fourth, I think in that case, you need demand. Someone has to demand this. Can it be in Cleveland, for example, was the private sector. In the case of England, was the national government. You need someone that will demand this, and building alliances and coalitions, I think, will help in that. Having studied a lot of these metropolitan areas and mega cities, there's no one fits all system. So we need innovation and we need journalism. Making mistakes in a 10 million people city is a big mistake. So you need to go and we need to benchmark. I mean, we need to look why is the London model working, but it's so different from the Barcelona model. Why is Quito in one way working, and why is Medellin working? And they're very different models of metropolitan administration. So I think we can look at them, and in my experience as being, governor of Santiago, is that we need to experiment in a way also. In the case of Santiago, when you don't have a dominated municipality, you need an elected official above all the supra-municipal authority. And that was the case in London, it's been the case in Istanbul, it's the case in Santiago. You don't have, it was the case in Quito as well. You need an elected big mayor for the whole city. No single municipality is going to give any authority to the municipality right next to them, unless, for example, in the case of Medellin or Rosario, the main municipality is big enough and has a lot of power. So that's another lesson. And last but not least, I think we need new tools for metropolitan citizen participation. I mean, the town hall meeting, the traditional town hall meeting, it works in a very small scale. So we need to build something in between the town hall meeting and the national elections. And so be it, through technology, be it through, these more regular participatory sims. There's an experiment in some places in the world about random democracy. I don't know if you've heard of it. It sounds weird, but I've learned that even in the early Athens democracy, people were randomly elected to be part of governing bodies. So I don't know, we have to experiment. Our democracies are in crisis everywhere, and this is a tool. So closing reflections. First, I want to thank once again the Kellogg Institute, the Clio School of Institutional School of Global Affairs, and of course the Institute of International Initiatives, Notre Dame, for allowing me. I'm not an academic, as many of you. I'm more a practitioner, but it's been wonderful just to be here, a semester to think, to read, to write, and to learn, and to meet wonderful people. So I'm so grateful. You cannot imagine. Of course, I will go back to do some teaching, but more, active politics than academic research. But still, this is a wonderful time. Then I think really it's not because I've been, minister and mayor and governor. I really think when you see people involved in climate change, people involved in transport systems, that really like the urban stage will be the main battlefront, the ground for all the issues related with sustainable agenda in the future. Be it crime prevention, be it climate change. We need to build more cities. I was just saying, in 6 years we have to build 10 New Yorks in the world. And imagine, how many people is going to be in 20 more years. What type of cities are we going to build? Based on the cars, the Atlanta model or the Barcelona model? What are the cities that will be able to compete in the world? And I think, the type of cities will make the difference. Also, I'm concerned about, national politics and democracy. I think representative traditional democracy is in crisis everywhere, not only in the States or Latin America, in Europe. So how do we renew our democracy? Is local politics has something to say, and local arrangements for these metropolitan areas, can it help to renew our democracy system? Is the spirit of mayors, this problem solver, risk seeker, coalition builder type of guy, something that can add to our national politics or not? That's some reflection I have. And last, I think, despite all this is about governing and institutions and processes, but you need testimonies as well. I mean, we need, a politics of compassion and proximity that will make people trust again politicians. You can have all the wonderful institutions, but if are run only by good people and disbelief people, we won't be able to fix our democracy. My motto when I was governor was la cabeza piensa donde están los pies. Everyone that worked with me could repeat this as a mantra. La cabeza piensa donde están los pies. The head thinks where the feet stand. And that was a way of trying to live in practice when we preach in our speech, that we will be closer to the people, learning the projects, and then having effective solutions at the metropolitan scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful job. You're a great teacher, and you are a great teacher, so it's an honor to follow. I had a comment and a question based on that. you talked about and showed us very graphic pictures of dual cities, the divided city with high inequality, spatial and income. And this is true everywhere in the world. That is, however, I mean, even in the United States, of course. However, the difference, I think, is partly that the size of the poorer sector, and secondly, how separate you can be from it. There are many students here who go on an urban plunge, who see things that they've never seen in their daily life. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, my impression of Latin America is that the size is big, but you can often stay out of those areas. Unlike, say, in Asia, from India, Calcutta, Mumbai, it is everywhere, it's mixed, okay? So I wanted to ask you, were you able to do anything to deal with inequality in the cities as such, and what political constraint you face? Because if the two worlds are separate, then the elites will not care about the city as a whole. Whereas in Asian countries, everybody has to care, but often they don't care. So I wanted to find out, could you do any specific things and what constraints you face?
Well, I think we have two problems. One is people that do not, that no mixed neighborhoods. So how do you make social and urban integration? And that's another one, but it's possible. When you still have some big pieces of land, you can make policies, if you're the owner of the land, to make that mix. We are doing that in Cerrillos. We used to be an airport in Santiago. So we're, from the design table, we're making that a mixed neighborhood. So that can work. Maybe not the richest of the richest, but a more diverse, middle class, upper middle class, and then lower class. We can still do something in the upper side of Santiago, which is the richest part, but it's tough. There are some experiments going on, and you see how classist the people can become. They want their gated communities. They don't want anyone else that look like a poor people. And even they're building their universities, private universities, what they call very high in the mountains. They call it the Cota Mil, the 1,000 meter high threshold. So they're building everything above that. It's very difficult to get there. So some of these people never see each other. But the other side of it is you can really use metropolitan governments to level up the city. So for example, when you build 8 parks of 200 hectares in one city, all of them in poor places, run and administered by the regional government, not the local government that doesn't have the money. In 4 years span, you change the life of that people. Maybe you didn't change the income distribution of the city, but you changed their quality of life. But for sure. So you make places, so some of the places I showed with garbage around them, when that translates into a park, and we're talking about 50 square meter houses. So imagine how important for that people is a park. They don't have a garden, they don't have a playground. So you can make the difference by over investing in those places. The metro, for example, when you get the metro or a good bus system to a poor area, you change their life. From 2 hours in a bus to 30 minutes in a good and dignified metro. And then the parks, and then of course you have other policies, health and culture. So one is integration, which is harder. The other one is level up, which I think is feasible.
Thanks, Fred. It was lovely. And also what was great, apart from what you said, was how much you smiled when you talked about it, which is really which is fantastic to see. So mine follows on from that question, which was you answered really powerfully on the kind of policies that you can do to address a divided city. I'd like to ask about how you handle the kind of power politics of it, because it isn't just that, in a divided city, some will be short-sighted and selfish and classist and unthinking of the whole. Those people are more powerful, and so their influence will be greater. How did you feel, and do the mayors feel that those with disproportionate wealth have disproportionate influence, and how do you all handle that challenge?
No, absolutely. I mean, the voice. I mean, exit voice and loyalty, the voice of the haves is much greater than the have-nots, and we know that for sure. So you can have, one water cut in one comuna of Santiago, one neighborhood that's very rich, and the mayor, which is probably our presidential candidate in the next one, will, hit the table, and the company will just rush to solve the problem. If that happens in a very poor area, even if the mayor smashes the table, nobody will hear. So you get your car stolen in one area of Santiago, it's in the front pages of every newspaper. You get killed in the other extreme of Santiago, nobody knows. So that is part of the equation. However, the interesting thing, I was the mayor of one of the communities, and I would say, well-known mayor. I was, 2 times elected the best mayor of the country, so I was heard. But by being governor, I could speak out. I could make ministers of my government, who were both appointed, but hear things that we were saying. And so, in a city where you have such disparities, and you have the not in my backyard syndrome, the only way you can overweight that is to have an elected official for the whole city. Because then, what is your power? Your votes. I didn't have the votes, only because I ran for president before, I was well known. But, an intendente government just go like this. That's why they last so little. Because anyone complains against the intendente, he's out of the office. This new government, the Piñera government, has replaced 3 times one intendente in 1 week. 3 times in 1 year. So imagine that changed to an elected official, 4-year term, and with the ability to speak for the whole city. Because some of these comunas, very rich one, the richest comuna in Santiago, has 70,000 people. The poorest comuna in Santiago has 600,000 inhabitants. But in the public discourse, the 70,000 weigh much more, unless they have someone that is their advocate.
Yeah, so I was going to ask something that actually you made me think about the last thing. So, but first of all, thanks, that was amazing. Great. And the smiling is also I was thinking the same thing. No, like I'm wondering very basic questions of institutional design, right? So 2 aspects of Chile that strike me as unusual. One is it's very centralized. You mentioned that. So one implication of that is that mayors are very weak in terms of their policy tools compared to their counterparts in Argentina, but even more in Brazil. So I wonder about the implication of that, and relatedly, these governors were appointed, which is actually typical of a unitary place, but now that's being changed. So one implication of that could be that actually, because now mayors and governors are elected by this region, maybe they are more sensitive to the voice of the poor, because now numbers start mattering. So I wonder, out of those 2 things, the weakness of mayors and the role of that change, what do you think?
Well, of course, during the Pinochet years, we didn't have elected mayors, we had appointed mayors. That changed in 1993. When the first mayors were elected, they were kind of the garbage guys. They would clean the streets and pick up the garbage. That was the kind of mayor we had. 20 years later, all the most well-known politicians of the country are mayors. So that changed. Sometimes the law came afterwards. For example, the main concern of the citizens was safety. But on the law, mayors were not responsible for safety. That was a national issue. But mayors did it anyway. They didn't call the police, security, paz ciudadana, they call it. They would do things. Only 5 years ago, they changed the law, and now they have the authority. So that's changed a lot. So then really, we don't have local governments on a legal basis, but they're very close to it. And for example, 2 former presidential candidates of the right are right now mayors. One of the main guys for the next election used to be a mayor. So the politics in Chile changed. And now you have much more power if you have been closer to the people than if you have been in Congress. That's one thing. And in terms of the reform, it's going to be tough. Because, as you can imagine, a very centralized country will not decentralize from one day to another. So the only real thing that happened is that we're going to elect the governors. When you look at the attribution, the legal powers and the money is very weak. So you're going to have a battle for the next 4 years or 8 years of elected governors asking for more resources and for attributions for the. But my experience is that even with the weak powers you have, there's a lot of coordination and advocacy and influence that you can have being a governor, even with, in this context. That's my impression.
Hi, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I would like to go back to the issue of inequality. In some of my research, actually, I have found that the poor living in context of high inequality are more skeptical of the local government. And so actually the title of the paper is when delivering the goods is not enough. And so basically, I mean, the main idea is that the poor actually have to feel that they have been integrated, in the decision-making process. And so I was wondering what are your thoughts, or actually in practice, how do you aggregate the preferences of the poor? One way, like in Brazil in particular, is like participatory budgeting, and the other local governments, I mean, across Latin America have been talking about, but some of them haven't really implemented. So what are your thoughts about this process of representation of the poor in unequal cities, particularly because, the issue of inequality actually undermines like the legitimacy of local governments?
Well, just to support your statement, if you were to see political participation among social classes in Santiago and in Chile, is very diverse. So richer people are participating much more than poor people. And probably that has to do not only with your cultural and social educational background, but also how skeptical you are of traditional politicians. And you have good reasons to be skeptical if you're a poor living in Santiago. And how do you aggregate them other than elections, which is a very important tool? I mean, when you run for election for the first time in 2020 in Santiago, you will have a lot of people trying to see what the poor think, if they are the majority. So that's going to be one tool. It cannot be the only one. I think that's what I meant about experiment. I mentioned, for example, there are specific concerns about specific issues. I mean, it's very easy to make the neighborhoods of a specific area of Santiago participate in the design of their park. They will love it. How do you redesign an avenue that crosses 5 different municipalities? That's tough. But we need to do it, and we need to experiment. We had focus group, we have working tables, we went to the streets, we have surveys, we have online surveying. So we did a lot of stuff, and still some people said I wasn't asked. But when we called them, they didn't show up. So we need to increase, and maybe I would say something that is not politically correct, but we used to have mandatory elections in Chile. And in one attack of progressiveness, we changed that in the middle of election and became voluntary. And that overrepresented the rich in our election system. So if I could, on a political level, I would make it mandatory again.
I would vote for you. Yes.
So as you know, I'm from Chile, and I worked in the participation process of the remodelation of the avenue that Claudio is talking about. And I think working directly on facilitating the discussions and everything, we would see a bunch of people actually came, and we're really interesting ideas. But in the end, a really weak point I'd say from the project was that when we had the change of local governments and new majors, they actually changed a lot of we went from one party, they changed to the other, and because the previous party had said yes, we like this project, the next one is kind of of course we don't like this thing. So I think I kind of learned the hard way how hard it is to keep sustainability projects when you keep these kind of short cycles of elections. So I guess my question is, why necessarily would electing a governor would not, how would you ensure that an elected governor also keeps sustainability and long-term in mind? And it's not actually the same thing that 4 years of one intended, and the next year when they're done, they would just say let's overrun everything. And in that sense, why it's so good to have a democratically elected one?
Well, the first reason I think is, with this type of complexity, both in the topics and also the size, the scope of the challenges you have, having an appointed intendente that will last on average 1 year. So at least we're moving from 1 to 4. That's the start point. Second, I think by having an elected governor, you will have metropolitan issues on the table. Let me just go back to a foreign example, like London. London was the greater metropolitan authority of London. The mayor was elected only recently in 2000. Transport policy used to be a policy, sophisticated thing run by the national government. But for the first 15 to 20 years of the elected mayor of London, the main topic of the election was transport. I think in Santiago, for example, just to go back to one of the main issues of Santiago is mobility. I mean, people are spending 2 or 3 hours a day in their buses. And of course, the quality of service is very different from a poor slum to the richest part of the city. Why nobody talks in election times about these issues? Because this is between the national policy, national pension policy, and the local park. There hasn't been ever a discussion about metropolitan issues, about air pollution, resilience of the city, urban planning. Are we going to still keep on growing the city or not? Having a more compact city? Those are issues that never have been in the public debate. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I'm sure that with a metropolitan election, you will have those issues. And probably, even though we have the same risk that whenever that governor will change, the new one elected can, get rid of all the things that were done before, some of them will remain. And I think the topics will be there. One other thing, going back to the point you mentioned, I think we have to learn and to build into the design of projects and policies the issue of an alternacy in power. So we do it in a way that we we're going to build into the project defenses for the dismantling of the policy. We didn't do that in Alameda Providencia, and that was our error, and that was a mistake.
Okay, thank you, Claudio. It was very informative and very interesting. I just thought there was a little bit of a tension between, on the one hand, you stressed and you made a very good case for the need of a more centralized political authority in Santiago to deal with all these difficult problems. But on the other hand, you stressed a lot the local needs and the need for local participatory forms of governance. And I thought that there's a little bit of a tension there. Because don't you, so if you make the governance more centralized, isn't there the problem that maybe the centralized authority would be less responsive to local needs and local interests?
Well, there is. That's why I don't think metropolitan governments should have deal with everything. Yeah. Only with issues that are metropolitan. So when you see, for example, the recent research in the OECD countries, what are the type of things that metropolitan governance structures are doing? Economic development, environment, transport. Why? Because those are issues that cannot be dealt at the local level without effectiveness and efficiencies. If you see, if you go to Barcelona, the Metropolitan Authority of Barcelona, of course, each one of the ayuntamientos, they have their own policies. But when it comes to transport, when it comes to promoting Barcelona as a brand in the world, they're one. So you have to select very carefully what things you're going to keep in this new layer of government, and what others are you going to keep at the local, more proximal, where there's more participation, and what others are you going to keep at the national level? You still have a national level.
Thank you very much, Claudio. So two quick questions that were linked to things that were said before. The first is that actually we have talked a lot about inequality, but an even larger inequality in many of the countries is between the city and the rest of the country, right? So these are global cities from London to Santiago to Barcelona, which have become part of a global processes of accumulation, and everyone else is left behind. And we know that Brexit had a lot to do with those things.
So as mayor and as then as intendente, how did you see your responsibility with the rest of the country, not with your city, but and how did you think about what is that your city had to do for the rest of the country to reduce those things? And then the second, which connects to this discussion about democracy and elections, could you tell us a little bit more about what was good about being part of the same coalition than the central government, right? Because one of the things of having elections is that then suddenly you have all kinds of fights with others that you didn't. So I want, if you can reflect a little on both advantages or disadvantages of being part of the concertation at the time that the concertation.
Okay, let's go for the first one. To be quite honest, when I was mayor of Peñalolén, my world was Peñalolén. I didn't care about anyone else. I woke up in the morning and went to bed very late at night. And my issue was Peñalolén to become the best comuna in the country. That was my motto. And so when I became intendente, I realized, I know how mayors think. They're all for their citizens. 24/7, and they don't care what happens, from the boundary of their city to the next. And however, very little people lived 24 hours in their own comuna. In a city like this one, they live around the city. They need the transport system. They need the clean air. They need the health. So my conversation with, at least within the city, was there are things that are common from us. So one of those things, let's fight the government, the national government, because it's a very centralized country, to get those things for the city. Then, when it comes to the country, I used to be a presidential candidate, so I did have to have a speech for the whole country. My idea always was, when regions do well, Santiago does well. We don't want more people in Santiago, for the first thing. So we need that Temuco, Concepción, Valparaíso, Antofagasta do well. If they don't do well, people will continue to come to Santiago as the only alternative for their lives. This is not good news for Santiago. That's not the one thing. Second, I think having elected governors is good for Santiago, but also it's good for Temuco or Punta Arenas. They have 3 intendentes in 1 year. I think if I were a citizen of Punta Arenas, what would I be thinking right now? I mean, I remember when I became intendente, the Chamber of Tourism came to speak to me. And they said, in 25 years, we have never had a second meeting with the same intendente. So imagine what kind of plan or program or project can you have for your region if you have to change intendentes every time you meet them. So I think that's it. And going back to another question about what was good about being part of the consortium. Of course, I knew the people. Some of them were friends. The Ministry of Finance used to be my Secretary of Sports in high school. So that helps. Whenever we had a problem, disagreement between the ministers and the intendente, which was very outspoken, we would go to Michelle Bachelet, which was a friend, and also the president, and I had the access to these people. However, let me say, sometimes I felt, because I was mayor when Piñera was president. So I was an opposition mayor with Piñera, and it went well for me. Sometimes by being of the same group, the greater good of the coalition is such an important argument that will shut you down every time you want to ask for something. When you're in the opposition, sometimes they're more willing to listen to you, especially if you are an honest, effective mayor or governor.
So maybe one last question.
Yeah, so I want to follow up on this point, because I think it's very important considering the weaknesses that democracy is kind of exhibiting right now, the rise of populism. Populism is, a lot of these places are kind of like, Chile did, they kind of, okay, well, no more mandatory elections, now it's, now it's a voluntary election. They're almost taking on these giving up democracy. And it seems to me that it's not necessary, and you being a prime example of why it's not necessary to have elections for this. And it's not just a matter of just strengthening the position and making it not, well, at any point in time we can revoke your
your power, the national government can revoke your position as the governor of Santiago, and more just saying, like, okay, well now it's a 4-year term and you pick the right person to do it, and and it seems like conceptually you could come up with a different method where someone like you keeps getting put in this position, assuming there are other people like you.
Let me answer from international comparison. This is not an issue of Santiago or Chile. The issue of metropolitan areas and megacities around the world is a new issue, and it's not easy. It's not easy to run, a city with 100 municipalities. It's different. How do you coordinate it? What are the powers? It's national. Even though countries are very different and there's no one fits for all, but for many years in England, the national government had a ministry for London. So a minister was responsible for the city. That didn't really make sense. And now there are these city deals, trying to bargain with cities to have authorities that will have a more overall vision. Why? Because now it's not only about picking up the garbage, it's not only about cleaning up the streets, it's about urban development, economic development, access to affordable housing, which is a big issue right now in London. In fact, the last election, the issue in London was affordable housing, was not transport, was just right. Right? So I think you need to be responsible. There's a discussion. Do we need a new layer of law between the localities, municipalities, and national government? In these big cities, I think we need it. And I don't see another way of electing them as a democratic election. However, when there, as I said, in the case of Barcelona, Medellin, Rosario, when there's a dominant municipality that has more than 50% of the population of the metropolitan area, I think the only possible agreement is a metropolitan government body that is a coalition, it's an association. In the other cases, when there's no one with more than 7% of the total population, I think you need a top supra-municipal authority. Those are the different, and of course, it will vary. The authorities, the topics. I just mentioned the average topics, but I don't see how can you make it more efficient for the climate, for the people, city, without one policy for transport, for example.
Great. Well, Claudio, I just have to say one thing. I think I've been at a lot of talks in this room at the Kellogg Institute. I can't remember one time when somebody commented on the demeanor and smiling at a person, much less two people commented. But I have to say, I think it's actually almost a code for saying people really appreciated the energy, the candor, the thinking about the light and dark, and not only as a good politician having a really compelling narrative, but also kind of being willing to look at some of the questions undergirding the issues and policies that you're really interested in. So it's a lot of fun. I want to thank you.
He didn't even tell us a story about how he effectively dealt with football hooligans.
Oh, that's a good one. That was the next talk.
Right, no, but I'm going to make an offer, which I can actually do this. He is going to be here till the end of April. He loves to talk about this stuff. And so this is meant to be an entree to a conversation for anybody interested in hearing about football or other subjects. And he's here on the second floor of Vestberg. And again, thank you very much.
Mira, almorzar ni mañana ni esta semana ya no puedo almorzar. Hoy es la otra, un café. Wow.